The wind screamed through the broken windows of East Detroit like a dying animal. It was 20 degrees below zero, and the blizzard had turned the city into a graveyard of white silence. No one was out here. No one except Elias Bones Thorne. He killed the engine of his Harley, the sudden silence ringing in his ears. He hadn't stopped because of the cold. He had stopped because of the wreck. 10 yards away, a police cruiser sat crumpled against a concrete pillar, steam still rising from its shattered radiator. The blue and red lights were spinning, cutting through the snow, but there was no siren. Just the wind. Elias wiped the snowflakes from his beard and stepped closer, his heavy boots crunching on the ice. He didn't want to be here. A Hell's Angel at a crime scene was a recipe for a prison sentence. But then he saw the blood. A trail of crimson smeared across the pristine white snow, leading away from the driver's door. And at the end of that trail, slumped against the freezing brick wall, was a woman. She wasn't moving. Elias knelt beside her, the leather of his cut creaking in the cold. He grabbed her shoulder and turned her over. The moment his flashlight hit her chest, his stomach dropped. A silver badge glinted in the light. Officer Sarah O'Connor. Elias froze. He was staring directly at his natural enemy. On his back, he wore the death head patch of the Hells Angels. On her chest, she wore the shield of the Detroit Police Department. In any other world, they were at war. But then her eyes fluttered open. They were wide, terrified, and filled with pain. She looked at his face, then at the patches on his vest. She knew exactly what he was. But she didn't reach for her gun. She reached for his hand. "Please," she whispered, blood bubbling past her lips. "Don't leave me." Elias stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the empty, frozen street. He could get back on his bike. He could ride away and disappear into the storm. No one would ever know. Leaving her was safe. Saving her was treason. But as the snow buried them both, Elias realized this wasn't about the law anymore. It was about a choice that would either damn him or redeem him. Before we dive into this freezing night in Detroit, if you believe that humanity matters more than a badge or a patch, hit that subscribe button and like this video right now. Because the decision Elias makes next is about to shock the entire city. Elias stood over her, his breath pluming in the freezing air like dragon smoke. Detroit in January was a death sentence for the unprepared. The wind chill was already pushing 30 below, a temperature that turned skin to ice in minutes. This part of the city, the old industrial district, was a ghost town. No ambulances came here quickly. Cops didn't patrol here alone. He looked down at the woman. The snow around her was no longer white. It was a slushy, dark pink. His mind screamed at him to run. Walk away, Bones. Just walk away. For 20 years, Elias had lived by a code. The Hells Angels were his family, his tribe. And the police? They were the opposition. They were the ones who kicked down the doors of the clubhouse during raids. They were the ones who planted evidence, who harassed his brothers, who looked at anyone on a Harley like they were trash. In Elias's world, a badge didn't mean safety. It meant trouble. He looked at the cruiser again. Whoever had ambushed her was long gone. If he stayed, if he touched her, his DNA would be all over a dead cop. The media would have a field day. Biker gang member murders hero officer. He could see the headlines. He could feel the handcuffs. "It's karma," he muttered to himself, his voice rough. "You chose the badge, you chose the risk." He took a step back toward his bike. The engine was still ticking, warm and inviting. He could be back at the clubhouse in 20 minutes, drinking a whiskey, safe and warm. He turned his back on her. He actually took 2 steps away. But then he heard it. a sound so faint the wind almost tore it away. "Mom." Elias stopped. His hand froze on the throttle of his bike. He looked back over his shoulder. Sarah wasn't looking at him anymore. Her eyes were unfocused, staring up at the swirling gray sky. She wasn't calling for backup. She wasn't reciting the Miranda rights. She was a 26-year-old girl calling for her mother because she was terrified of dying alone in the dark. She reached out blindly, her fingers closing around the cuff of his leather jeans. She didn't pull. She just held on. It was a grip of pure desperation. Something inside Elias's chest, something he thought had turned to stone years ago, cracked. The hate, the bias, the decades of us versus them. It all collided with the reality of a trembling hand holding on to him as the last anchor to life. She wasn't a cop right now. She was just a kid. And she was freezing to death. The moment her hand touched him, the alleyway in Detroit vanished. Elias was suddenly 10 years in the past, standing on a rainy highway outside of Chicago. He saw the flashing red and blue lights. He saw the yellow tape. And he saw Chloe, his little sister. She had been trapped in her overturned sedan for 40 minutes. The police were there. The paramedics were there. But nobody moved. They were arguing about jurisdiction. They were waiting for the jaws of life from another county. They were following protocol. Elias had screamed at them. He had tried to run to her, but 2 officers had tackled him, pinning his face into the wet asphalt while he watched Chloe bleed out. He watched the light fade from her eyes while men in uniforms filled out paperwork. That was the day Elias Thorne died, and Bones was born. He realized that the system didn't care about people. It cared about rules. He joined the Angels because they had their own rules. They didn't wait for permission to help their own. Now, standing in the snow, Elias looked down at Officer Sarah O'Connor. But he didn't see a cop. He saw Chloe. The universe was playing a cruel joke. It was giving him a second chance, but it was forcing him to save the very thing he hated to redeem the thing he loved. "Not again," Elias growled. "Not tonight." If he left her, he wasn't sticking it to the system. If he left her, he was becoming them. He would be just another man watching a girl die because of fear and protocol. Elias dropped to his knees in the snow. The cold soaked instantly through his jeans, but he didn't feel it. He grabbed Sarah's face between his rough, gloved hands. "Hey," he barked. "Stay with me. You hear me?" She blinked, focusing weakly on his face. He needed to stop the bleeding. He looked around. Nothing but snow and trash. He looked at her uniform. Too stiff, too thin. He needed something thick, something heavy. Elias stood up and unzipped his coat. The leather vest was his identity. The patches on the back, the winged skull, the rockers, took years to earn. They were sacred. You never let anyone touch your cut. You never let it touch the ground. It was the armor that separated him from the civilians. He stripped it off. The biting wind hit his flannel shirt instantly, cutting to the bone. He didn't hesitate. He folded the heavy leather vest, turning the sacred colors inside out, and pressed it hard against the gunshot wound in her abdomen. Sarah cried out in pain, her body arching off the ground. "I know," Elias gritted his teeth, leaning his full weight onto the vest. "I know it hurts, but you're not checking out on me. I didn't save you just to watch you die." "We have to move," Elias told her, though she was barely conscious. "Ambulance won't make it in this storm. I'm taking you in." He pulled her up. She was dead weight, her body limp and slippery with blood. He groaned, the veins in his neck bulging as he hauled her upright. He dragged her through the snow to his Harley. Mounting the bike with an unconscious passenger was nearly impossible. He sat her behind him, pulling her arms around his waist. But as soon as he let go, she started to slide off. "Damn it!" Elias cursed. He ripped the heavy leather belt from his jeans. He wrapped it around Sarah's waist and then around his own, buckling it as tight as it would go. He literally strapped her to his back. They were fused now, the outlaw and the officer. Elias kicked the starter. The Harley roared to life, a beast waking up in the apocalypse. "Hold on!" he yelled over the wind. He dropped the clutch and the bike fishtailed violently on the ice before the rear tire found traction. They shot out of the alley and onto the desolate street. The ride was a nightmare. The snow was coming down horizontally, blinding him. His goggles frosted over every few seconds, forcing him to wipe them with a freezing glove. The road was a sheet of black ice. One wrong move, one tap of the brakes, and they would slide into a telephone pole and die instantly. Elias leaned forward, his body shielding Sarah from the brunt of the storm. He could feel her head resting against his back. Her breathing was shallow, rhythmic puffs of heat against his spine. "Keep breathing," he prayed. "Just keep breathing." Suddenly, headlights blinded him. A semi-truck, jackknifed across the intersection, was sliding sideways toward them. The driver had lost control on the ice. A wall of steel was coming right for them. Elias didn't brake. Braking meant death. He twisted the throttle. The engine screamed. He banked the heavy bike hard to the left, aiming for a narrow gap between the sliding truck's trailer and the guardrail. It was a suicide gap. Whoosh! They shot through the gap with inches to spare. The wind from the truck nearly knocked them over, but Elias held the line, his forearms burning with the effort. He didn't slow down. He couldn't. "Stay with me," he screamed into the wind, checking the rearview mirror. Sarah's head was still against his back, but she wasn't moving. "We're almost there! Don't you quit on me!" The lights of Detroit Mercy Hospital appeared like a beacon in the gray, swirling void. Elias didn't look for a parking spot. He jumped the curb, the heavy suspension of the Harley slamming down onto the sidewalk. He gunned the engine, scattering a few smokers huddled near the entrance, and skidded to a halt right in front of the automatic sliding doors. The doors opened. The heat from the lobby hit him like a physical blow. Elias unbuckled the belt with trembling, frozen fingers. He slid off the bike, his legs numb, and grabbed Sarah. He scooped her up into his arms, blood still soaking through his flannel shirt, his beard caked in ice, and kicked the doors open wider. He burst into the ER lobby. "Help!" His voice boomed, cracking with exhaustion. "I need a doctor, now!" The reaction was instant silence. Everyone, patients, nurses, security, stared. They saw a monster from a nightmare, a giant, bearded biker covered in blood, carrying a limp police officer. "Drop her!" 2 hospital security guards, retired cops probably, drew their weapons. They saw the cut on the floor outside. He had left it on the wound. They saw the tattoos, and they saw a dead cop. They did the math and got the wrong answer. "Get on the ground, now!" Elias didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He walked forward, ignoring the guns pointed at his chest, and gently lowered Sarah onto a gurney that a nurse had instinctively pushed forward. "She's shot in the gut," Elias said, his voice surprisingly calm. "She's lost a lot of blood." "I said get on your knees!" the guard screamed, closing in. Elias looked at the guard, then at Sarah as the doctors swarmed her. He saw an oxygen mask go over her face. He saw her chest rise. She was alive. Slowly, Elias raised his bloody hands. He sank to his knees on the sterile white tiles. "Just save her," Elias whispered, as the guard shoved him face down onto the floor and clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. Save her first. Officer Sarah O'Connor survived. It took 48 hours for her to wake up and tell the detectives the truth. By the time they realized their mistake, Elias had been released from the holding cell. He hadn't waited for an apology. He had walked out into the cold and vanished. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night, the door to the Iron Horse, the Hells Angels clubhouse, opened. The music stopped. Every biker in the room stood up, hands drifting toward knives and pool cues. Standing in the doorway was Captain Miller, Sarah's commanding officer, in full uniform. He was alone. He walked straight to the bar where Elias was sitting. The tension in the room was explosive. One wrong move and a war would start. Miller didn't reach for his gun. He reached into a bag. He pulled out a leather vest. It was Elias's cut. It had been cleaned. The bullet hole in the leather had been stitched up with meticulous care. Miller placed it on the bar. He looked Elias in the eye. There was no hatred in his gaze anymore. Just respect. A soldier looking at a soldier. "She's going to make it," Miller said quietly. "Because of you." Elias looked at the vest, then at Miller. He nodded once. "Tell her to stay out of my alley." Miller cracked a small smile. He turned and walked out. Elias put his hand on the vest. He hadn't changed sides. He was still an outlaw. But that night in the snow, he proved that underneath the patches and the badges, blood beats the same color. Now, I have a question for you. If you were Elias, seeing your enemy dying in the snow, would you have stopped? Or would you have kept riding? Let us know your answer in the comments below. And if this story reminded you that even in the darkest storms, humanity can still shine, please subscribe to the channel and share this video. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. Thanks for watching.